Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
It had started snowing lightly about an hour ago, but now, as I stared out the bus window, the snowfall had transformed into a near blizzard. My forehead rested against the cold glass, and my thoughts drifted back to what had led me to take this bus trip in early January. 8 weeks earlier, I noticed the blinking light on my old answering machine, wondering who could possibly be leaving a message. My social life had been practically non-existent during the past year as I focused on finishing my PhD dissertation. When I pressed play, I was pleasantly surprised to hear a familiar voice. "Hey, Ryan, it's Chloe. Chloe Harris. Mom and I are going to be in town tomorrow to check out the graduate program at your university. Maybe we could grab dinner? Give me a call on my cell. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. I love you. Bye." Chloe and I had dated for over a year, and our connection had grown deep. One evening, she told me her father was moving the family back to North Carolina. She didn't want to go, but she felt she had no choice for her mother's sake. I never liked her father. He was arrogant and selfish, and I suspected he might have been abusive to her mom. Just 2 days after that conversation, Chloe was gone, and I realized how much I truly cared for her. Picking up the phone, I dialed her number and accepted the invitation for dinner. The following evening, I arrived at one of the best restaurants in town and spotted Chloe and her mother, Caroline, sitting at a table with an older man I did not know. As I approached the table, they saw me and Chloe got up from her seat, as did her mother and the older man. Chloe jumped into my arms and kissed me with a great deal of passion. She whispered in my ear, "God, I have missed you." Carol, as her mother liked to be called, gave me a hug and introduced the man as her father, David Bennett. After spending time over dinner catching up on what was happening with our lives the past 5 years, Chloe said her grandfather had a perplexing problem he needed help in solving. Seems that he had done some investigation into my background and discovered I was getting my PhD in computer science and technology with an emphasis in forensic accounting. "Ryan, I don't know what Chloe has told you about me. I own a very large business with its headquarters in Charlotte. I am the third largest producer of lumber and forest-related products in the U.S. I own a lot of property in the Southeast, as well as several million acres in Oregon and Washington state. In the last 18 months, my profit margin has remained steady, but when I look at the bottom line, the cash is not there. I have looked at the expenditures-to-income ratios, and they are in acceptable parameters," he explained. "Someone is stealing, and I can't figure out how or who. Chloe tells me that you might be able to help, and I sure could use it." He went on explaining he couldn't trust anyone in upper management as they might be involved, although he sure hated to think that any of these longtime employees and friends would do this to him. After asking him several questions and receiving the right answers, I agreed to look into his problem. He then produced several computer CD disks from his jacket pocket. "These disks have the complete financial records for the past 3 years," he said. "I sure hope you can help me. It will be several weeks before I can start. I am getting ready to defend my dissertation early next month, and I have to debug the software program I wrote to analyze deceptive accounting practices," I explained. I promised him some answers by mid-January. I finished my degree and debugged the software program in late December and began my investigation into David Bennett's financials. By January 3rd, I not only had the what, but also the how it was being done. All I needed to do now was find the who. When I made the telephone call to Chloe telling her of my progress, and before she put her grandfather on the line, she said, "I love you." She then put her grandfather on the line. He wanted to send his company business jet to bring me to Charlotte. "That's not a good idea," I said. "I'll need to nose around your offices and access your company's servers, and I don't want to raise any red flags about myself, and a sure way to do that would be to have you send a jet to Central Florida to pick me up." As luck would have it, the Aircraft Mechanics Union went on strike the following day, shutting down the entire commercial airline industry and forcing me onto riding a Greyhound bus in the middle of the night during a blizzard. Just then I was shaken from my thoughts as the driver began slowing the bus as he proceeded down the exit ramp from the interstate. Shifting gears, he turned onto the street to begin the short drive to the bus terminal. 5 minutes later, we arrived. The clock at the station read 2:20 and the outside temperature of 28 degrees. Not bad, only 10 minutes late. Retrieving my backpack, containing my laptop computer, from the overhead rack, I proceeded to the front of the bus, stepped onto the sidewalk, and followed the driver to the baggage compartment. He handed me my bag, and I quickly entered the warm terminal waiting room. Looking around, I saw David Bennett striding toward me. He was alone. The look on his face told me something was wrong, very wrong. Taking my bag from me, he turned and walked toward the parking lot. Placing the bag in the back of his Mercedes ML 550 SUV, he said, "There has been an accident. Chloe is in the hospital. Caroline is with her." During the 40-minute drive, he told me as much of the details as he knew. The state police told me that according to several witnesses, a white cargo van deliberately forced her car from the road and down an embankment, rolling several times. The van never slowed down and sped away. The van was found several hours later abandoned in the parking garage of a local shopping mall. It had been wiped clean of all fingerprints. The police lab was now examining it for other possible trace evidence. Because of the storm, cell phone coverage was spotty, so he did not have any updates on Chloe's condition since he had left the hospital 3 hours ago. At that time, she was still unconscious and was undergoing tests to determine the extent of her injuries. He knew she had a broken left wrist and some facial cuts, in addition to possible internal injuries. By the time we arrived, the snow had stopped, but not the cold wind. Parking the SUV in a space reserved for the hospital director, we hurried inside. He won't mind not having his parking spot. I funded the building of this place 2 years ago. He is a good friend. Taking the elevator to the 6th-floor intensive care unit, we walked briskly down the well-lit hallway. As we approached the room, he asked for an update on his granddaughter from one of the doctors standing just outside the door. "Michael," he asked, "what's going on? How is she?" "David," he replied. "In addition to the broken wrist, she has a couple of cracked ribs. I am waiting on the CAT scan to determine the extent of any internal injuries. She took a nasty blow to her head, but there is no evidence of a fractured skull. The EEG shows strong brain activity, and we should know more in the next 8 to 12 hours. We took her off the ventilator, and right now she is resting comfortably." Before entering the room, David turned to me and introduced the doctor he had spoken to. "Ryan, this is Michael Grayson. He is the head of the neurological department at Duke University Medical School. Michael, Ryan Langston. He is a very close friend of the family." Opening the door, we saw Carol standing next to Chloe's bed. She was lying there with an 4 drip in her right arm. Her left wrist was encased in a fiberglass cast. Her head was bandaged and her face was covered with bruises and several small cuts which had been stitched. Carol threw her arms around her father's neck and began crying onto his shoulders. Daddy, what has he done to my little girl?" she sobbed. How could he do this to his own daughter? I stood there in shock. What was she saying? Calm down, Caroline," David whispered into her ear as he gently led her from the room. Then as he was about to leave the room, he turned to me and mouthed the word, "Later." I pulled a chair close to Chloe's bed and held her right hand while talking to her. "I'm here. It's Ryan. I'm staying right here with you. I'm not leaving you." I talked to her for quite some time, and then must have dozed off because the weak winter sun streamed into the room woke me. As I tried to release her hand, she stirred and gripped my hand, refusing to let go. Her eyes blinked open, and she stared at me asking what had happened. At that moment, Carol and her father stepped into the room. Hearing her question, they rushed to her bedside. "You were involved in a very bad accident and have been asleep for over 20 hours, I replied. "You are pretty beat up, but you'll get better." As I stood up and tried again to release her hand, she whispered, "Don't go. Stay with me, please." Later that afternoon, when Chloe had fallen into an exhausted sleep, David led me from the room saying, "You deserve an explanation for what Caroline said this morning. As you know, my daughter and her husband, Benny, separated some years ago. He abandoned her and Chloe. About 18 months ago, he resurfaced demanding money for granting her a divorce. He backed off that demand and told her he would wait until she inherited my estate, and then he would divorce her and take half of her inheritance. He could do this under the laws of this state regarding community property. When I found this out, I changed my will. My entire estate now goes to Chloe. There is only one small problem with this idea. If Chloe dies without being married, the entire estate reverts back to Caroline and he wins. Caroline is convinced that he is behind this accident. I have engaged the services of a private investigator to determine if there is any validity to her claim," he continued. "It shouldn't take too long for him to get back to me. Meanwhile," he continued, "we'll be staying at a nearby hotel while the doctors run some more tests to determine the extent of Chloe's injuries. Hopefully, we will be able to take her home in 10 days or so." Tuesday was a bright, sunny, but very cold day typical of late January when we brought Chloe home. As David drove up the long driveway, with me riding shotgun and Chloe and her mother in the back seat, I got my first look at David's home. It was huge and reminded me of an English manor house. Stopping in front, we were met by members of his household staff, who quickly assisted Chloe up the front steps leading to the massive twin doors leading inside. David and I followed along behind into a large reception hall. A magnificent marble staircase swept up to the 2nd floor. To the left and behind the staircase was an elevator with wood panel doors matching the paneling of the reception hall walls. Immediately to the right of the entrance doors, a set of double doors opened into the library, which also served as David's study. As Chloe, Caroline, and one of the female housekeepers entered the elevator, David escorted me into the library. The girls are going up to their rooms to rest a while before dinner. Let's sit by the fireplace and warm up a little bit. Would you care for a drink? He asked. Pouring 2 brandies, he sat in the leather chair across from me and said, I need to tell you what the private investigator's report revealed about the accident and Benny's involvement. Over the next hour and a half, he filled me in on the private investigator's report. Unfortunately, there was no concrete evidence that would be admissible in court of Benny's involvement in Chloe's accident. However, there was enough circumstantial evidence that we both agreed he was responsible. He had hired 2 illegal aliens to steal a white cargo van and crash it into Chloe's car. Afterward, they disappeared, and the PI had been unable to track them down. David said, I don't think it's going to end with this unsuccessful attempt. Sooner or later he going to try again, and we have to stop him. Got any ideas? Well, I do have a thought, I replied. As you know, Chloe and I have spent a considerable amount of time together over the past 10 days. We have shared a lot of ourselves with each other, and the fondness I have for her has grown into something far greater. I am not sure how she feels about me, but just suppose we were to announce our engagement to be married. In fact, it would not be true, but is sure to get back to Benny, and it would accomplish 2 things. First, he would know that if we were to be married, I would become her heir should something happen to her. Second, it would take the bullseye offer and place it on me. He would have to try to get rid of me before trying to get to her again. That would buy us time to figure out on how to stop him from carrying out his threat against Chloe. David just sat in his chair for several minutes thinking before saying anything. Well, that is certainly one idea. I am confident I could arrange protection for you, but before I agree, we have to discuss this with Caroline and Chloe. They both need to be aware of the personal risk to you should we carry out your plan. I need to think this over for a day before we go any further. I'll give you an answer tomorrow morning, and then we'll discuss it with the girls. Now on to our next problem, David continued. Your cover has been pretty much blown. Everyone in the office knows how close a friend you are to me and my family. So, we need to drop the idea of you working secretly to ferret out the embezzler. Well, let's sleep on it, and we'll come up with something in the morning. The following morning, David took me aside and said, I gave your idea a lot of thought last night and came to the conclusion that it just might work. Let's talk about your plan with Caroline and Chloe after breakfast and get their take on your suggestion. Later that morning after breakfast, David told the 2 girls he had something to discuss with them. Leading the 3 of us into the library, he proceeded to outline my plan. As soon as he mentioned the idea of the fake engagement and marriage announcement, Chloe leapt to her feet and ran from the room crying. The remaining 3 of us sat there stunned. Finally, Caroline stood and said, I'll go and talk with her and find out what upset her so much. 5 minutes later, she returned with her arm around Chloe and said, Chloe wants to say something to you, Ryan, in private. Daddy, can we leave them alone for a few minutes? I stood as Caroline and David left the room, closing the doors to the library behind them. I grasped both of Chloe's hands and led her to the leather sofa where we both sat. She continued to cry softly, but after several minutes, she began talking softly to me. Ryan, she began, I don't want a fake engagement. I don't want a phony marriage announcement. Ever since I was a little girl, I dreamed how the man I loved would propose to me, like in a fairy tale where Prince Charming would sweep me off my feet and carry me away in his arms. I know it sounds foolish, and when grandfather began talking about fake engagements and phony weddings, I just lost it. I love you. I want the real thing. With that, she threw her arms around me and began sobbing again into my chest. I held her tightly and whispered in her ear, I am a real jerk. I released myself from her, slid off the sofa to my knees and continued, Chloe, I love you with all my heart and soul. I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you. I may not be Prince Charming, but I promise to love and cherish you forever. Will you please marry me? As I rose to my feet, I grasped her hands and pulled her from her seat. I wrapped my arms around her, and she looked into my eyes and softly replied, You are my Prince Charming, and this is my fairy tale. Yes. 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 She pulled me closer and kissed me deeply. With my arm around her, we walked to the library doors and opened them to find David and Caroline waiting just outside. Mother, Grandfather, we have something to tell you, Chloe announced. Later that day, after the 4 of us had finished making some preliminary plans for an engagement party and selecting a date for the wedding, David and I returned to the library to discuss his other problem. I am sure the girls will be spending the rest of the day making more detailed plans, he stated. I need to return to the office on Monday, he continued. So that gives us 4 days to decide some sort of a plan to smoke out the embezzler. Before I could say anything, my cell phone rang. Looking at the caller ID, I saw it was my attorney and good friend Seth Anderson. "Hey, Seth," I said. "What's up?" I sat stunned listening to his reply. "How much did you say? Please repeat that figure. I'm not sure I heard you correctly." Seth went on to say he would fax me a completed contract as soon as he looked it over for my signature. Ending the call, I looked at David, who had a puzzled expression on his face. "Wow," I exclaimed. "They want to buy my forensic accounting software package." "Who?" he asked. "The largest distributor of business soft product in the world, Microsoft," I replied. "And they offered me $5 million upfront plus $2 on each unit sold." Seth told me he was going to play hardball with them. I never realized he had that kind of a fastball. "Okay," I continued. "Where were we? Oh yeah, a plan. Last night I hacked into your office mainframe server. I'll install some new security apps so no one else can do it in the future. From what I learned, I've narrowed the culprit down to one of 2 men in the purchasing department, Henry Wallace or Kyle Grayson. Now I already know the what, how, and by next week, the who. With your permission, I would like to purchase 10 new laptops and special cases for them." I explained to him my plan for not only identifying the embezzler, but also possibly getting his stolen money back. He agreed, and I went about adapting one of my old programs to accomplish my goals. The following afternoon, Chloe and I, accompanied by 2 of the biggest security men I ever saw, went to the local mall to shop for an engagement ring. At the second store we went into, Chloe found the exact setting she wanted. She was shocked when I told the sales representative that we wanted to see a selection of diamonds in a 1 to 2 carat range. When I selected a flawless 2-carat blue-white stone, she protested that it was much too expensive and she would be happy with something much smaller. "Sweetheart," I told her, "Prince Charming has no problem being able to purchase this for you. After all, it's his job to make sure your fairy tale comes true." The look on her face was priceless. After making arrangements to have the ring fitted properly, the sales rep promised to have it ready for her to wear in about an hour, or they would deliver it the next day. I told him we would be back later in the day, after doing some other shopping in the mall. It was a little after 5 when we arrived back home, and Chloe ran inside to show her mother and grandfather her ring. I followed along with a huge grin on my face. It really felt great to see her so happy and excited. When some order of calm resumed, David informed me that the fax from Seth Anderson had arrived and was on his desk in the library. He accompanied me into the library and told me to sit at his desk while I read the cover letter and the contract. Everything was spelled out in black and white and was just as Seth had described it to me yesterday morning. I signed it and faxed it back to Seth's office. In his cover letter, Seth informed me that as soon as he received the signed contract back, the initial money would be deposited in my account. All of a sudden, I was a wealthy man. Over dinner that evening, I told Chloe and her mother what had happened, and for the second time that day, the look on Chloe's face was priceless. David produced a bottle of champagne, and we celebrated our engagement and my good fortune. The rest of the evening was spent in pleasant conversation about the wedding plans and discussing possible honeymoon destinations. On Friday, the weather turned nasty as a front swept through down from Canada, bringing overcast skies and snow. By Saturday, the snow had stopped and was replaced by very cold temperatures, never getting above the low teens. Chloe and I spent a great deal of time together in front of the fireplace. I managed to finish my adaptation of an old program I had developed and burned a set of discs for use next week. Sunday evening, I logged on to David's company's mainframe computer. I was checking the purchasing department's records when I spotted it. "Gotcha, you maggot," I mumbled to myself. I shut down my laptop and walked downstairs to find David sitting at his desk in the library. "I know who the embezzler is," I said. "It's Kyle Grayson, the department head. He got greedy and embezzled another $250,000. I know how to get the money back. All of it." "Grayson, huh?" David replied. "I would never have guessed it would be him. He's been working for me for over 15 years. I told him what I had discovered. He used his company laptop to send an email to his accomplice. Surprise, surprise. Guess who? None other than your good-for-nothing son-in-law, Benny Harris. "You're kidding," he responded. "Nope," I exclaimed. "This is what I am going to do with those new laptops, in cases you allowed me to order." I went on to explain my plan to recover the stolen money and at the same time to turn Benny and Kyle against each other. With any luck, not only would we be able to put them both away for the theft, but also gather evidence of Benny's involvement in Chloe's accident. The laptops and cases were to being shipped by FedEx directly to David's office Monday morning, and on Tuesday the fun would begin. At least for David and me, but not so much for Kyle and Benny. We left early Monday morning for David's office. He and I sat in the back seat of his Mercedes SUV, and 2 of the 10 security agents assigned to protect David and his family sat in front. When we arrived, sometime after 9:30, the agent in the front passenger seat got out, opened the rear door, and accompanied us inside. The driver parked the car and joined us while we waited for the elevator taking us to David's office on the top floor. David placed his and my briefcase on his office desk and then took me around introducing me to his staff and colleagues. He made it a point to introduce me as his granddaughter's fiancé, particularly when meeting with Kyle Grayson. When we returned to his office, the FedEx delivery had arrived, and the laptops had been placed in the conference room adjacent to his office. I began unpacking the laptops, collecting the serial numbers and entering them onto the documents each department head would have to sign when we exchanged their old one for their new one. After all, the laptops were company property and had to be accounted for as they were not considered personal gifts. Before connecting them to their respective battery chargers, I opened each case and installed a GPS tracking chip. I would be now able to pinpoint the location of each laptop if the need arose. I double-checked the carrying cases, and they were just as I had ordered. Each had the company name and logo stitched into the outside leather cover with each department head's name and title below. They really looked great. By now, it was almost 2 in the afternoon and David entered the conference room and asked, "Hey, let's get some lunch in the company dining room." Once there, he made a big deal talking about my upcoming marriage to his granddaughter. Around 4 o'clock, we left the office for home, accompanied by the same 2 security agents. As we were leaving in the SUV, he turned to me and with a wink said, "That ought to get the pot boiling." I bet Grayson was on the phone to Benny before lunch was over with the news. Oh yeah, I also had my secretary email each department head notifying him of the laptop exchange tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the conference room. Tuesday morning at 10, all the department heads were assembled in the conference room with their old laptops. David announced, "If you don't know, Ryan has his Ph.D. in computers and will be assisting you in the transfer of data from your old laptop to your new one. Also, the leather laptop cases are my gift to you for your years of loyal service to me and this organization." "Gentlemen," I began, "please sign the 2 documents before you. The first acknowledging the return of your old company laptop and the second one for the issuance of your new company laptop. Mrs. Davidson, Mr. Bennett's secretary, will collect them and return copies of them for your records in just a few minutes." After the 2 documents were collected, I continued, "Along with your new laptop, you will find 2 additional items, a FireWire cable, and a computer disk. At this time, please connect the FireWire to the appropriate ports on your old laptop and your new one. Then boot up both laptops. Turn off any security applications you may have run, and this will enable you to transfer your data from your old laptop to your new one. Also, please transfer any additional applications you may have installed in addition to the ones that came with your computer. Updated versions of these older applications have already been pre-installed for you on your new one. The transfer of data may take several minutes depending on the amount of data to be transferred. Double-check that you are transferring all the data files and additional applications you may have installed. The next step will be to reformat your old laptop hard drive, erasing it completely so that we may safely donate the old computers to a worthy charity and not give away company information." 5 minutes later, after all the department heads indicated that they had transferred everything they wanted, I continued, "Now disconnect your FireWire connection and put the computer disk in front of you in your old laptop. Double-click in the icon labeled Wipe Clean that appears on your screen and follow the directions. When the program finishes, you will be instructed to restart your laptop. You should see a screen that states hard drive contains no applications or data. When this happens, the computer disk will automatically be ejected. Please return this disk to me when you are finished." As I collected these disks, I was careful to place the one Kyle Grayson had on the bottom of the stack. After the conference room had been cleared, I took Kyle Grayson's old laptop and his copy of the Wipe Clean program back to David's office. "These go home with us this evening. It will be very interesting to see what I find out. But I want to work on them away from prying eyes," I told David. Putting them in David's office safe, I returned to the conference room to pack up the other laptops in preparation for donation to a local school. I reinstalled an operating system and a few simple applications that children would be able to use. Later that evening, after dinner, I told Caroline, Chloe, and David I was going to work on Grayson's computer in the library, and they were welcome to join me and watch. I booted up his laptop, installed the Wipe Clean disk, and typed the command Discover. The program worked just as I had programmed it to do several nights ago. All of Kyle's files reappeared. I turned to David and stated, "This computer is your company's property and legally, therefore, you are entitled to see anything that may be stored on its hard drive. Now let's see what secrets it holds." Glancing through the file directory, I opened one particular file. When it appeared on the screen, I exclaimed, "Perfect! just what I was hoping to find. I explained to the two girls and David that when people sit in front of a computer screen, they have an unrealistic expectation of privacy. They believe no one will ever see what they are doing. Kyle Grayson was no exception. The file that I opened contained a list of offshore bank accounts, along with the passwords to access them. Each account listed Kyle Grayson and Benny Harris as co-owners. I quickly went online and opened each account using the passwords Kyle had so thoughtfully provided. "Look at this. He made his last deposit last night," I said. "I think it's time to make some withdrawals." It took me no time at all to set up a secret account for David and transfer all the money to him. I then changed the passwords to each of those accounts, guaranteeing that neither Kyle or Benny would be able to access the empty account records. There would be no way either Grayson or Harris would be able to track the lost funds from their accounts. "Now the fun really begins," I said. I sent an email to both Grayson and Harris from each of these offshore banks, notifying them that their accounts had been closed and the money transferred as per their instructions. Each of them will believe the other one is responsible for emptying the accounts, and we get to sit back and watch the fur fly, I said with a chuckle. Sure enough, when we arrived at David's office Wednesday, the local police were all over the place conducting interviews and taking statements from everybody there. We were told that Harris had showed up at Grayson home late last night. There was a violent argument and Benny Harris shot and killed Kyle Grayson. Benny was caught trying to escape, foolishly produced the gun and waved it at the officers. He was shot and killed before he could fire his weapon. An investigation uncovered the fact that Grayson had been embezzling money from David Bennett's business for several years. He and Benny Harris were partners in the scheme, and there had been a falling out over the stolen money. The money trail went cold when it was discovered the funds from the offshore bank had been withdrawn and transferred by Grayson. It was assumed he had set up another account somewhere else. The money had been transferred so many times that it eventually became lost in cyberspace, and the investigation was closed. 5 months later, on August 21st, Chloe and I were married in a garden on David's estate. Caroline was her matron of honor and David was my best man. For our honeymoon, we went on a 6-month cruise around the world. After all, money was of no concern. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.